For 20 years I've had a piece of unfinished business in Glencoe. Every time I drive through that glen, the climb was staring back at me from Craig of Anchor. But the more time went on, the more I wondered if I really wanted to do a route that dangerous. You might think it's easy just to call it unjustifiable and forget about it, but I've never found that easy. Tunnel Wall on Craig of Anchor is a brilliant but very compact face with barely any cracks for protection. As a consequence, the central section is bolted and contains some of Scotland's best sport routes. To the left and right though, there are some extremely bold and poorly protected trad climbs. Symbiosis was first climbed in 1995 by Dave Cuthbertson and Paul Thorburn. I remember seeing this picture of Cubby on it in a climbing magazine when I just started climbing. I thought it looked like the living end, climbing on such tiny crimps with only the poorest of microwires and the odd skyhook for protection. Unsurprisingly, the route has only had a couple of ascents since, and only from legends of trad climbing.
That whole process of climbing something which isn't bolted just demands so much more on the psyche, on your technique, and this thing up here, and it tested me. It did have to put the stops out. You could get hurt, so there's a few wobblers here and there. I don't suppose anyone's fallen on that gear in earnest.
I first got on it at a time when I was doing large volumes of routes like this. In the summer of 2001, I was climbing lots of on-site trad, many E6s and some E7s. I decided to try Symbiosis on-site. To preserve the on-site in the face of its difficulties, I was climbing as high as I dared and then reversing back to the ground without once weighting the rope. I recall feeling mostly relaxed and in control while doing it, but when I look back I must admit that I shudder to think what would have happened if I'd fallen onto the atrocious runners. This move was the highest I got to on my on-site attempt. I remember doing a move just before this that I wasn't at all sure that I could reverse, but I was appalled how poor this microwire placement was and immediately felt out of my depth. I was rapidly getting pumped and realised I'd better engage reverse gear or fall off. And although I made it safely back to the ground, I felt I'd stepped over the line of acceptable risk. After that, I never went back to the climb. It would have been nice to finish it on site, but I'm glad I chose life instead. However, I still wanted to do it. With 20 years under the bridge, I decided that I would go back and climb Symbiosis after practicing the moves on a top rope. After a winter of bouldering, I was not particularly endurance fit for this climb, so I still wasn't certain I was up to the job, and I knew that I'd have to proceed very carefully. As expected, I could do the moves without a problem on the top rope, but that's not where the difficulty in this route lies. The challenge is to have the stamina to arrange a large number of really poor runners, and then have enough confidence to move beyond them to the next set of terrible runners. My first thought when starting up the climb on lead was surprise at how relaxed I had been on those initial moves on site. It was a stark reminder that if you want to be a good on-site trad climber, there is no substitute for clocking up large amounts of time on the sharp end. I'm a stronger and more experienced climber now than I was when I was trying to on-site it, but I would not say that I felt at home moving above these rubbish skyhook runners. In case you're wondering what the third rope is for, I clip it to the skyhook and then my climbing partner pulls it tight to a runner on the ground. Hopefully this lowers the probability that the hook will just ping off if you fall onto it. To be honest, I wouldn't be at all surprised if not a single one of these runners held if I were to fall off. With that in mind, I assessed the conditions before committing to the next section. Well, I need to decide what to do now. I mean, it feels really greasy. I was really struggling there. I don't think it's a good idea to try and do the route today.
I think you may be right.
Yeah, so I think.
Got instinct telling you, mate.
Yeah, I think I'll just down climb. I don't actually feel fit enough to do it. Don't think I've got the stamina. I should be not pumped here. It's like I'm recovering. I think if it was good conditions, I would be all right now.
Aye. If it had been the other day there.
Yeah.
Aye.
Right, this might be a battle.
Right, I'm going to move.
I'm now at a height where falling off really would mean very serious injury as a minimum. I have to assume that I'm soloing, even though I'm still glad to have these things clipped to the rope. The conditions had become very humid and I felt more pumped than I should be. I had let this climb sit here for 20 years already. It could sit here for a few more days.
Yep, just like that.
Definitely a relief to be on the ground again.
Scary.
And just for fun, I tried weighting the rope on the ground. No surprises that that cam didn't even hold for a nanosecond. Next visit, it did feel cooler, but with the threat of rain in the air. first task was to get all that gear in again. After arranging all the hooks, I thought I would attempt to climb past my previous high point and arrange the next batch of gear before down climbing to the ground again. It was going to be pumpy and probably about E8 in itself. So I'm going to go up and I clip all these runners on red.
Yep.
So as I'm coming back down, you have to kind of let out a bit on red and take in on purple. Okay, climbing. I figured I'd start with probably the only runner on the whole pitch that has a decent probability of holding a fall. I've always been a bit clumsy with opening slings like this. I made a bit of a mess of it, but I could feel the pump coming, so I just clipped it and moved on. The second wire is behind the little hollow crimp that I'm hanging from. When tugging on the wire, I can feel the block vibrating, which rather adds to the lack of confidence in the runner. You might ask why bother putting a second one in. Possibly this is for psychological benefit only. I sensed that it had started raining, but I wasn't too concerned since it was blowing past the crag and the holds were not getting wet. I had to get these runners in no matter what, so it didn't affect my priorities either way. A few more very poor micros to complete the nest and I could start the hard bit, getting back to the ground without weighting the rope or pumping off. Okay, coming down. Excellent. I hoped for the cloud to clear so that I wouldn't have rain on my mind for the upper half of the pitch. Sadly, the conditions didn't improve, and so I got my attempt underway and decided to just deal with any problems as and when they arose. Right, better get on with it. Just here, it's crucial to arrange as many runners as possible before committing to the crux run out above. I put the best one in first, a rock and roller that Cubby lent me for the specific climb. He described the placement to me as bomber. Certainly the placement is good, but in all honesty I'd be terrified to take a large fall onto it, since it looks like the runner itself may break, hence the screamer. Good to have that one in. Also, hence the arrangement of several other cams. Every single one is pretty marginal, but this is about improving a low probability of one of them saving you in a fall. I could feel a little rain in the air and I looked round to make an assessment. It didn't look great, but the top half of the pitch was more or less a sprint to the top without much more gear to place, so I decided it was getting done. Okay, I'm gonna go for a climb. I often use this technique of speaking in a relaxed manner to my climbing partners or inwardly to myself to help with maintaining composure on dangerous leads. It's important to understand its limitations though. Its utility is in reaffirming a feeling that you have things in hand when you really do have things in hand. In so doing, it prevents irrational fear from getting in the way of an otherwise safe ascent of a dangerous route. However, you can also use it to trick yourself into thinking or acting like everything is under control when it actually isn't, and retreat would be in your best interests. So you have to be careful when you use it. I couldn't get this micro to seat properly, and you'll see in a minute that it falls out as I move above it. Inwardly, I laughed to myself about the ridiculousness of clipping it to the rope and the inescapability of my position. I was worried about this rockover onto a foothold that slopes away from you, so I took a lot of care to place it perfectly and time the weighting of it carefully. So far out from that marginal gear, the ropes feel kind of pointless. Nonetheless, I still wanted to stop and place a few more comedy microwires. I'd still rather have them clipped than not. Runners like this have saved my ass in the past. Right here, a more pressing issue arose. The rain had properly come on. At this height, the crag was catching the wind more, and spots of wet were getting into the holes. They weren't yet wet, but it was pretty obvious they might be in short order. I was on easier terrain now, joining the E5 that comes in from the right, but tunnel wall rock is smooth and glassy, and it would not be safe to climb in the full-on wet. These runners are good, but as I moved back left, I realised the rope was going to pull the nut sideways out of its placement. From experience, I didn't even need to think what to do, just automatically clipping it short into the cam so that it wasn't pulling on the nut. Approaching the belay ledge, the climbing was easy now, but the holds were wet. So I really took my time, especially with the awkward down climb to the anchor of the adjacent sport climb. Okay mate, that's me on the purple there. Oh dear. Cheers. Oh, that was scary, man. Bloody hell. Yeah, it was, yeah, I would have been absolutely shitting it if I got here on lead. As usual, Glencoe has the last laugh, and by the time we got back to the car, the rain had been replaced by this lovely sunshine that lasted for nearly the next month. If you're interested in hearing more from Cubby about his hard trad climbs, I shot a whole interview with him about that, which I'll post up in a future episode, and do make sure you subscribe to make sure you see that.